Well, experts are warning the construction industry could be in for mass layoffs and housing delays due to supply chain issues caused by the Middle East war. Nicholas Proud is the chief executive of the Civil Contractors Federation. He says there needs to be greater cost certainty in contracts.
If we're talking about $1 billion project, there's about $50 million worth of extra cost around the fuel, in particular around that diesel. And that's not in the contract. That's not paid for in some of those contracts. Large-scale government contracts, we have got rise and fall provisions. We have learnt from COVID. If there's one good thing that came out of that, we realised we need to have flexibility around contracts, and some state governments have those in place for those large projects. It's the ones that are stuck in the middle of the government to contractor contracts that we have, where there's not... the detail's just not there in the contract. We need to make sure there's cost recovery so those projects can continue, and then we can ensure that that staff aren't laid down and that workers aren't going off those jobs. We get them done and get them completed, but we need a hand with the cost of that diesel.
Yeah, help with the cost of the diesel. I mean, the government has already put in various measures, fuel excise being cut, the cancellation of heavy vehicle use charges. I mean, what more could the government do?
Well, that brings materials to site. That's fine, but a lot of the diesel we use is off-road. It's what we require in those areas where we use significant amount of diesel. It's about 1.2 billion litres per annum of diesel that our members alone, CCF's members alone, use. So we see most of that is off the road, and it's what we do when we're building those greenfield subdivisions, or the work we do on water, sewage and infrastructure, such as energy, electricity, building wind farms. Anything that enables community is what we do, and that diesel is coming at a cost that's really putting some businesses in peril. And if we're talking about private to private contracts where the government's not involved, their finance clauses, they're based on how much someone can borrow and can lend, and they're at their limit in terms of what they can put back into the contract. So we've got to figure that out. We're really focusing on the government to contractor level contracts at the moment, because we think we've got some movement and flexibility that we'll get. We're talking with the governments today.
All right, you are having a meeting with them. I mean, won't the government be concerned that any sort of cash injection to tide over construction businesses during this period will then just knock on inflation?
Well, Saul Eslake's done the report that's been released today. So he's done the report into the impacts of the Middle East and fuel crisis on our industry. And he's not seeing that this would be an inflationary impact. It's only paying for the bills that we've got today. But they've risen, and getting those projects done is the critical thing. Look, there will be an inflationary impact of all of this fuel crisis. That's something that the report will show, that we have an issue where materials, will they come back to the levels of 6 to 8 weeks ago? And from COVID, we would think that probably won't be the case. We need to bring them back as close as we can once this crisis averts.
You talked, Nicholas, about insolvency, and that the construction industry has a particular problem with it. I mean, is there an estimate of how many businesses potentially could go under, how many staff could be laid off?
Well, construction is the highest, has the highest prevalence of insolvency as an industry. Civil's only a part of that. But look, we lose about 3,500 businesses a year. That's doubled since COVID. So we've seen that significant rise. Maybe that was taking out some of the businesses that were operating a little bit lean. There's a range of reasons why businesses fail. But we expect that there will be, could be in the hundreds, could be more if we don't have support. There's businesses right now figuring out how they can get the cash flow to do the projects they're doing today, and whether they can bid for contracts going forward, particularly in those private to private contracts.
Looking further into the future, the longer term, I mean, we know that the problem isn't going to be fixed for weeks, potentially months, and that depends on there not being an escalation in fighting there. How then does that knock on to future big construction projects?
Well, every contractor in our group has a calculator. They can calculate how much it is that they're out of pocket today. They can go back to the contracts that they have and the client and be able to talk to them. Now, if it's a government client, that makes it a lot easier. And those discussions are quite positive from what we're hearing in some cases, and in others it's got to be dealt with. like the federal government today has said that it's up to the state governments, because they deliver the projects, even if it's federal funding, that the state governments need to be able to look at this and come up with some contractual flexibilities. Now, as I say, we've got a discussion with federal government department and those state departments today. I think we'll get some progress in that space. Some of the states are already moving. Queensland is already acting, and based on what they did post-COVID and during COVID, they're already hitting the ground running with our contractors. So we're very pleased with that. And other states are also looking at this. Some, we have to get some progress, and we'll do that today.